So thank you again, everyone, for joining. This is the ds-incubator, again, on the series about getting data from the web. And today we are going to be talking about using APIs. This meetup covers the following three objectives. Basically, I really want everyone to be aware of APIs, to remember that they exist, and to prefer them over kind of hardcore web scraping. Which can be difficult, time-consuming, and also even illegal, depending on the policies of the website that you are trying to scrape. Also, how to actually search for useful APIs. It's not guaranteed that the tools I'm going to show you will find you APIs. Even if they exist, you may not discover them, but at least I'm going to give you some obvious places to look for them. And finally, we're going to cover one example where I'm using an API to kind of reproduce an example that CJ shared with me using a slightly different approach because now the HTTR2 package is the start of the show, which is a relatively new package, a new iteration over the HTTR package, which is now superseded, but it still works perfectly fine. So let's go to, as usual, here we are on the page of the ds-incubator ds.webdata. So if you scroll up this README file, you will find, as usual, folders. Today we are in meetup number 3, so the folder of today is 3 API. And that one also has a README, and that is what we're going to be covering today. I'm not sure if we're going to have time to explore too much on the console in our studio, because at least 2 of the people here in the meeting have other things to do a quarter past, so I'm going to try go fast, hopefully ending before they go so they have the opportunity to make some comments. So I wanted to start with how I think I ended, or at least something that I commented on last meetup, which is this idea that if you have an API, then that's what you should be using as opposed to going hardcore and scraping the web. And the idea comes from not only experience, but also from this blog called Ethics in Web Scraping, and this is one of the ground rules, actually is the first one. So today we're going to be using as an example one task that CJ did sometime in the past, and the code that he wrote is available in a private repository to which he might be able to give you access if you want. And it's this idea where he's getting exchange rates from the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. So we're going to be using this HTTR2 package, which is the one that I want you to be most aware of, which is a general tool for querying APIs. But then I'm also going to be using a specific package called IMFR, which I discovered by reading the documentation, and also with another package that is called package search, which allows us to search for packages on CRUN. Also, we're going to be using the tidyverse for general purposes. So the very first part then of this task of trying to get these exchange rates from IMF is not so much to show you the specific tool, because it's too specific, and what I show you here won't kind of apply to other API work that you might want to do, but it is mostly to raise awareness that sometimes you do get lucky and you do get APIs, or you do get even packages that wrap APIs on which you can build, and then that saves you a lot of time. So there is this IMFR package that wraps the API from the International Monetary Fund, and it gives you basically the data that we might want to use to get those exchange rates. So how do you use, for example, the package search package to search for packages? Well, basically it's like a Google search. You just call the package _search function and then pass some keywords. I tried a few keywords, and some that I thought would work didn't work. For example, typing IMF and not IMFR did not give the first hit, which is the most useful. So you may need to try a few things there to make sure that there is nothing like what you want. But here alone, I already find at least two packages that may be useful, and indeed the first one is useful. It has a function with arguments that very nicely map to the parameters that the API provides, And here what we are doing is we're using this one useful function from the IMFR package to get the data from there. We need to specify a few parameters. That the first is kind of cryptic, and you need to read the documentation to know what database ID you want here, and the indicator as well. But then frequency makes a little sense. M stands for month. There is also a Q that stands for quarter, and I think an A for annual or something like that. And then there is this start parameter and end parameter where you say the time period within which you want to query the data. So this is very quick, just to show you that sometimes you get lucky and then you get the data that you want through another package that wraps an API. So you don't even need to know too much about the API. And if you want details, as usual, you would go to the documentation of the package itself, as opposed to the documentation of the API. If you need more details, then you could go to the documentation of the API. And I highlight that because the documentation of APIs are not structured in the same way that, for example, our packages documentation are structured. Our packages enforce some minimum documentation that you have to have for every function, but it's not the case for APIs, so it's kind of up to developers to make it good or bad. So the art of reading documentation is something that you may get more proficient with experience. And sometimes there may be even mistakes. I'm going to show one now that beat me while developing this example. So this second section now, it does talk about the HTTR2 package, which this is the general tool that it should work for you in most cases. You should use it just about any time that you have RESTful API, which is a specific kind of API, which is very common these days. Unless you, of course, find something that is even more specific, like the IMFR package. But otherwise, the HTTR2 package is the one that you want to know about. So again, how do I even know that there is an API that I can use with the HTTR2 package? Well, I wrote a little post here on the repo resources, where so far I'm collecting some ways in which you can find APIs. The obvious one is, of course, to just Google. So if I try that, if I say something like IMF REST API, I do get something sensible, and indeed, I would land on the places I want. I get to the documentation of the API, and even a specific article that talks about using the API with Python and R. So indeed, of course, try Google first, but that's maybe obvious. And then there is other places to look for them. For example, there is a repository that collects public APIs. It's not obviously comprehensive. I'm sure this repo misses many, but I don't know, it's worth searching. So there, for example, if I type Exchange, I could get somewhere, I do get some hits. And if I type, let's see, at the very end, let's do, it has also topics like finance, for example, is here. So if you're specifically interested in APIs within a topic, that's probably the place you want to search. I think there is one. Let's see if there is IMF. Maybe not. Exchange or exchange rate. Exchange rate. There is a bunch of things like currency API. There is a lot of things that are promising. So before you do the really hard work, always remember that you may have like easier paths, right? The paths of least resistance to at least search for them. So going back to our article, so I did go to I did find an API that sounded promising, and I went to the documentation, which is this one here. It does explain how you can get data of different kinds. In particular, the one that we want in this example is this one here. It's one method. When you talk about methods, you can think of functions in R. So basically, the API exposes some methods, think functions that you can use via the web browser to get data that the documentation advertises. So this very weird format of the URL here. I think it's probably a little clearer if I show you what it looks like here. This is it. So basically, we need to type on the web browser a URL that has this format, a base, which is, in this case, I'm considering a base all of this. And then this, I consider a base because then I can reuse it and extend it or append it to query data for different methods. So compact data is one of the methods documented in the API. So here, this is compact data. But then there's other methods, so I could reuse the base URL to query data for different methods. So the one that we're going to be using today is only that, compact data. And then the query requires a database identifier, for example, IFS, a frequency, for example, M for month. Then this dot thingies, I'm not sure what it means. Then an indicator. The indicator we want here is called CPI, but the way you encode that is PCPI _ IX. All of this is detailed in the documentation, not very clearly, but it's there, so a little bit of hard work. And then anything that goes after this question mark is what we call query parameters. So we have one parameter is start period, just like functions have in R parameters that take values. The same thing with methods for APIs also have parameters that have values. So now the parameter start period has we can give it the value 2000, for example, if that's where we want to start the query. And if we want to end in 2001, then the parameter end period takes the value 2001. So this is the URL that we would want to pass to the browser. So I can do it like manually here and paste it, but that's not the idea. I get this ugly looking data, which is called, the format of this data is called JSON, which is ugly to read for humans, but beautiful to read for computers. So that's what we're going to be using to read it. We're going to be using our computer for that. So one note here is that I was really struggling to get the data, and I realized that the documentation was misleading. There was I don't know if it was a typo or what, but basically what I wanted here is a JSON in this piece, and the documentation was asking me to use XML, and that didn't work. So this is again to raise awareness that the documentation of APIs is the resource that you need to use to learn how to use it, and it's not structured in the same way that our packages are. It cannot, sometimes it's not great, sometimes it is, so it's hit or miss really. So with HDT-R2, this is how we would create the URL that I just showed you above. So to create this URL programmatically in the computer, so you can do it iteratively and maybe query very, very many pieces of data, then you could do something like this. So you create that base URL here, and you create a request object. That object is basically metadata, doesn't do much. It doesn't ask for a lot of information from the web. It's pretty lightweight. And then we keep extending, in this case, appending the URL with the pieces that we want based on what we learned from the documentation that URL has to contain, right? So in this case, I give it the method, I give it the database, I give it the frequency, I give it the indicator, and I give it a start and end period. So this last bit is a query, things that will go after the question mark, and the other things are just pieces of the of the path. I think it's called endpoint. Maybe CJ can correct me there. Yeah. Beautiful, great. Thanks. Please do.
When data and it's not available in APIs, somebody else has gone through this work and then they kind of repackage it and give it to you on some other website. And while that's often much easier and convenient to use, it sometimes happens that you don't know how often that's going to be updated, or you don't know how strict they are about screening it and then repackaging it for you. So I just want to give a word of caution. Like, I always prefer to get stuff directly from a first-party source. Searching for third-party sources or second-party sources should always be like at least a lower priority for you, because you don't really know the provenance of the data at that time. That make it about
Thank you. Great point. Thanks, AJ. Thanks for passing your experience and for being here. Those who have to go, thanks for joining. I'm going to wrap up fairly soon, but after you go. So, thanks. So, speeding through the rest of the content today, as I said before, the request object is something that you can extend basically to add more metadata to it, but it won't do much. Actually, we have this dry run function that kind of shows you a little bit of what that metadata contains. But then when you actually do the request, is when you call the req perform. So the set of functions in the HTTR2 package are pretty nice in that if you created a request object, then you have rec_ functions to do things with it. And then once you perform the request, the resp is the response. So the resp object is something that you manipulate with the resp_ functions. So basically the prefix of the function tells you which input those functions like, which is kind of a nice thing that the set of functions of the HTTR2 package has. I don't think it was that case for the HTTR package, the one that was now superseded. So these two lines, what they do is they actually go to the web and do request the data based on the request that we created before. So now this JSON object does contain the data. So the trick now is to try view that object and try understand which pieces we want. So for that, I am gonna go to R. Let's see, I think I have that object here stored in memory. Let me see, JSON, do I? Yes, I do. So the object that I showed you in the other document looks like this. It's a list. So we transformed the JSON object into an R list, and it has a bunch of pieces, including this very deeply nested little bunch of data sets. And getting in here is now kind of the next part of the trick, of the exercise, and of the meetup. And it's not necessarily like a web scraping or API specific kind of work. It's just a task of getting stuff out of a deeply nested list. So that's why I'm now gonna give it a lot of focus. I just point you to the tools that allow you to do that. So basically you have to inspect the object to see what is the data that you need, and then some of the best tools that I know of to get those pieces out of there into a data frame, which is generally what you want for data science, is tools from the pull package. Specifically, the plug function is very useful. In this case, we plug the series object inside the dataset object inside the compact data object, item in the list, not object, and then we get what I'm calling here a data. So that data is what we want, but still we need to do a little massage to get the data frame that I'm interested in getting here. So in particular, from all the data that I got from the web, I decided that I only wanted the ref area. So these two letters, symbols that represent where the currency comes from. And then I'm using the map family of functions, sometimes just the map function and sometimes the map character, to pull little pieces inside that list for every single item in the object that we got from the web. And with that, we also get time period and observation, which I guess is the exchange rate based on a base currency. So that's about it. The entire task from end to end is the following. Find an API. If you can, find even better an R package that wraps the API. Then do get the data based on the documentation either of the R package or more commonly of the API that you found. And then when you do that, do as whatever you need to do to get the data in a data frame that then is easy to inject in things like ggplot2 or dplyr, something that is easy to work with. So those are the takeaways. So search for useful APIs, search for packages if they exist. Also question the API's documentation, because it can be not the best, and to end as we started, avoid using techniques for web scraping if you actually do find an API. So that's the end of the session, with 9 minutes for comments or questions if you want to use them that way.
No questions right now, just trying to comprehend everything which has been shared.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I also don't have questions, but I transfer my script from HDR to HDR. It's a lot easier from what I saw.
Okay, so I'm going to wear my... Sorry for the background noise today, it's particularly noisy. Could you repeat, Constanza, please? You don't have questions, and you mentioned something about HTTR2? Right. I'm going to re-say what you said, because the recording is not capturing it, because I'm wearing my earphones. So yeah, I know, Constanza, you have some code with the HTTR package, which still works perfectly, but I do agree with you that the API of the HTTR2 package is nice. It's by the same maintainer as well, by Hadley Wickham, which means that if he develops something that supersedes the previous stuff, is because maybe at least him is convinced that this new alternative is the way to go, right? So yeah, I also look forward to practicing with this a lot more. This has been a lot of learning, and I have to thank a lot to ZJ, because he's been super helpful in getting me up to speed. Any other comment or question that I can re-say here? Okay, I'll let you go then. Thank you very much for joining. And next week we're going to have the last meetup with some use cases for for real uses in 2 degrees. See you next time. Ciao, ciao. Bye.